The fighting in the Persian Gulf is starting again. Trump had announced the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. As a result, there was shelling of merchant ships and American warships, as well as the sinking of Iranian boats. Since then, rockets and drones have been flying again. Everything that has happened, and above all, how things are likely to continue now, here in this situation report on the Iran war. Hezbollah. We'll start with Lebanon. Hezbollah is now deploying fiber optic drones in increasing numbers. They are also being produced locally. A video released by Hezbollah itself shows the production of the drones, which are being made by Hezbollah. Here we see various shots that can show the production process. Such videos can sometimes be staged. In the past, for example, we saw this with Hamas in the Gaza Strip, where they pretended to be manufacturing their own sniper rifles. However, I can't confirm if they can actually do that. And unlike Hamas, they obviously have much better access to machinery and components. So it's quite realistic that Hezbollah has started production themselves. Accordingly, there are more and more videos of drone operations, and most of them are fiber optic drones. We just saw a hit here. We can see hits here. That should be a Namer infantry fighting vehicle. Right, we see hits here, and it goes on like this. Here we have an attack on an excavator with personnel, and the excavator driver and his son were reportedly injured. The driver, the man, the father, was reportedly killed, at least according to Israeli reports. Here we have another attack by Hezbollah, where we can see them flying in and attacking a Humvee. I'm not sure if these are radio interferences or if it's still via fiber optics. However, the image quality is quite good. It's too good to be radio, especially when the transmitter isn't nearby. And here is another hit on a Namer. By the way, it's pretty unlikely that it got through here, since the Namer is extremely well armored, and especially at the front, it's not likely that the drone would get through. That shows us once again that Hezbollah still has deficiencies when it comes to their capabilities, but at least in terms of quantity, the use of drones by Hezbollah is increasing daily, and of course, this will inevitably increase the experience of the pilots, which will mean increasingly successful attacks. Of course, this is followed by numerous Israeli attacks. For example, the Israelis reported attacking 120 targets here on May 2nd, and according to Israel, several thousand Hezbollah fighters have already been killed. That means the ceasefire in Lebanon is now somewhat fragile, probably tentative. The fighting is starting. They are largely limited to the area immediately around the occupied territories, the territories occupied by the Israelis. So currently, there is little activity far north beyond the litany, but theoretically, that could change again in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, there have been diplomatic developments. For example, there was a new offer from the Iranians. The offers themselves haven't really changed much. The Iranians continue to demand an end to the blockade before any serious negotiations can even take place. And if the war ends, according to Al Jazeera, there are a few more details. If the war ends, it should be guaranteed that it won't be resumed before the important details are discussed, which of course makes it somewhat absurd, because that would mean that even if no agreement is reached, the war would still be over. But interestingly, at least Al Jazeera claims that the Iranians have agreed to 3.6% enrichment without storage. However, no facilities would be dismantled. In return, the sanctions would have to be lifted. The U.S. is demanding a reduction of enrichment for 20 years. According to this Al Jazeera article, Iran is offering 5 years. And what's interesting is that under the JCPOA, the Obama agreement with Iran was only allowed to enrich up to a maximum of 300 kilograms at 3.67%, and that was limited to 15 years. For 10 years, they weren't allowed to build any centrifuges, and the number of centrifuges was even supposed to be reduced. That means you could argue that the agreement Obama had back then was, at least in some parts, possibly better than what might come out in the end. But of course, no agreement has been made at this point. The other point that should be mentioned for fairness is that it was limited to 15 years. And of course, that period eventually ends. And what would happen then? Regardless of that, Mojtaba Khamenei, the new spiritual leader, has just announced that the Strait of Hormuz will come under new management and that this is not really up for negotiation, not negotiable. That means the international sea route there, the waterway, would be nationalized and under Iranian control, which of course is completely unacceptable for the nations involved and would generally be a violation of international norms. DIFA Press from Iran writes that a mutual blockade is effectively an economic war, and in the end, determination is what matters, and which side can hold out longer. At this point in time, that was definitely the right assessment. This is an economic war, and it really is a matter of willpower. The Iranians should, economically speaking, buckle sooner. But with Trump, the question is, how long is he willing to hold out? How long is he willing to watch oil prices, gasoline prices, and diesel prices keep rising? And especially with regard to the upcoming midterm elections, it's really a question where it definitely becomes a matter of willpower. The Iranians are determined. Because their offer was rejected, and since Trump already said he doesn't see it leading to success, they already considered the resumption of war likely. And currently, the Strait of Hormuz remains blocked. But it's not just them. The internet is also largely inaccessible in the region. If you want to access freely available information there, you need a VPN, which is what today's sponsor offers. You can use it to freely transfer information, but unfortunately not oil, at least as far as I know. For my work, I often have to access sites with geoblocking. That's when I need a VPN. I've been using CyberGhost for 4 years. CyberGhost VPN is one of the world's leading VPN providers with more than 38 million users. The VPN hides the IP address, encrypts the data, and routes all internet traffic through a secure VPN tunnel. The VPN allows access to over 40 popular streaming providers like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Disney, and BBC iPlayer, giving you worldwide access without geo-blocking. Servers in 100 countries are available for business and personal use. The software available for Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, Smart TV, game consoles, and Linux is not only user-friendly, but can also be operated without any technical knowledge. If any problems do arise, support is available around the clock, of course also in German. Thousands of 5-star reviews on Trustpilot speak for themselves. As do over 38 million users, with one subscription, you can register up to 7 different devices at the same time. You're explicitly allowed to share the login details with your family. By clicking on the link below, you will receive an 83% discount and then get an additional 4 months for free. CyberGhost offers a 45-day money-back guarantee, so you take no risk at all. Meanwhile, Iran has started to reduce its oil production. Bloomberg is reporting this. That's just how Iran is, of course. It's in Iran's interest to reduce production, to lower what is being extracted from the ground, especially while the tanks are not yet full. Shutting down wells that are particularly easy to bring back online would be one option here. Because, of course, the less that is extracted in the meantime, the longer it takes for the storage tanks to fill up. Specific wells that are especially easy to bring online, for example because the oil is very close to the surface, would be such an option here. Nowadays, extraction often takes place at depths well over 1,000 meters. Digging and drilling takes a correspondingly long time there. But if, for example, you have an oil source somewhere that is still producing at a depth of 20 meters, now would certainly be the right time. It might also be possible that Iran is running the pumps more slowly. I'm not sure about that. I'm just not an oil engineer. But in any case, there are reports that they are deliberately reducing production. It's clear here, of course, only to an extent that doesn't harm themselves. In the meantime, however, there have been further attacks on ships. For example, on May 3rd, so yesterday, an attack on a ship was reported in the Strait of Hormuz, near the Iranian coast. And Trump also announced Project Freedom yesterday, to enable passage through the Strait of Hormuz again. That means they want to make sure that the ships trapped in the Persian Gulf, together with well over 10,000, I've even read estimates of up to 30,000, sailors who are stuck on ships in the Strait of Hormuz, can move again, to make it possible for them to leave. Last week, Axios reports, the plan was apparently still to have warships escort the ships through the Strait of Hormuz, to forcibly open it this way if necessary, simply shooting at anything that gets in the way of these ships. At the last moment, they changed their minds and launched Project Freedom instead. But that's effectively a situation where there is no peace and no agreement. It's a stalemate where nothing is moving forward, and that was supposed to be broken in this way. It's important that it was explained that it's not about escorts, but about opening a cleared channel through the mines. So the US is telling global ship operators, ship owners, and captains, in this region, you can sail along designated routes without anything threatening you. We've already addressed in the past that, of course, it would take many months to confidently secure and identify each individual mine. But it's a completely different story to clear a specific channel. That's significantly easier, and you can mark it. And then, although the area to the left and right of it is highly dangerous, within that channel, you're safe, at least if everything goes smoothly. The blockade, and this is also important, was also reported by Stan Lamothe from the Washington Post. He says the blockade will continue during this time. The responsible admiral says here, the blockade will be maintained, and in the meantime, several U.S. warships are now in the Persian Gulf itself. A few weeks ago, there was the case where 2 U.S. warships passed through the Strait of Hormuz under international attention, right after the ceasefire began. And here we see, according to the U.S. military, several U.S. warships are in the Persian Gulf. Meanwhile, Iran had announced that ships not coordinating with Iran would be attacked, meaning they would be stopped by force if they tried to cross the Strait of Hormuz without coordinating with Iran. And then it was reported that Iran fired on U.S. warships and merchant ships this morning. In addition, Fars, which is an Iranian news agency, reported that there were 2 hits on a U.S. warship, and residents of the neighboring regions reported flying missiles that were heading toward the Strait of Hormuz. However, the U.S. denies that any of their warships were hit. Later, Iran, as reported here by Tasnim, spoke of warning shots that had been fired, and accordingly, it is claimed that the U.S. warship was driven away. So after these warning shots, the U.S. reportedly withdrew again. It's unclear what exactly happened there, but there are now suspicions that a Korean ship was attacked, and a tanker from the United Arab Emirates was definitely attacked. That means there have now been several ships attacked in the last 48 hours. At the same time, according to their own statements, the U.S. has sunk 6 Iranian boats. These were sunk by U.S. attack helicopters, presumably because they were either on their way to lay mines in the Strait of Hormuz or because they carried out attacks on ships. Iran, on the other hand, denies this. That means both sides are making different claims and denying different things. However, there are definitely attacks. For example, the media office in Fujairah reports that Fujairah was attacked. This is an AI translation of the original entry. And Fujairah is the only oil port in the Emirates that is currently exporting, because it is east of the Strait of Hormuz and therefore not being blocked. And according to the pictures circulating on the internet, a fire broke out there. And that seems to be true. In addition, the United Arab Emirates reports that 4 cruise missiles were fired at them. And the United Arab Emirates condemns the aggression that has been carried out against them in the past few hours, and reserves the right to take their own measures. The Israeli opposition leader says, meanwhile, that this is effectively a resumption of hostilities. And in Israel, they have raised the alert level, because they obviously expect that fighting will resume in full and break out again on a large scale. Meanwhile, the United Arab Emirates reports attacks with rockets and drones a few minutes ago. We have this here at 12:33 p.m. The recording is practically an hour later. That means, an hour ago, the United Arab Emirates reported another wave of attacks. That likely means fighting has resumed. It's still unclear whether it will die down again. Theoretically, it's certainly possible that the rockets and drones will stop flying in a few hours, and that it won't spread to Israel and the other Gulf states. But a return to full escalation is absolutely possible at the time of this recording. That will depend, among other things, on the U.S. response. If they now proceed to airstrikes on the Iranian mainland, then full escalation is likely to break out again. If Trump wanted this, he would have shifted the blame for a new outbreak of war onto Iran. That would certainly have been achieved through this Project Freedom action. And he himself could say that the escalation did not come from Trump, not from the USA. Basically, the negotiations were at an impasse. In other words, in a deadlock. You simply have to acknowledge that at this point in time. And I have addressed this in the past weeks, almost months now. that the negotiating positions are actually too far apart for a realistic, let alone simple negotiated solution to be expected. Basically, the US should be much more capable of maintaining the status quo, even if the fighting doesn't continue. In the long run, this should force the Iranians to give in. However, Trump obviously has no desire to wait, not least because of the high gas prices, which have apparently exceeded $6 per gallon in some states. Before the war started, he proudly posted on Truth Social that there were places where the price per gallon, I think, was around $1.75 or something like that. Of course, that's not directly comparable, but from the lowest price to the highest price, it has now more than tripled. That's obviously a huge increase. Even if local taxes and circumstances raise the prices a bit, oil prices have certainly more than doubled by now. On top of that, the midterms are just 6 months away, so it's unclear if Trump will want to resume the fighting, especially since there are still targets to address. The US military has said that they've worked through 75% of the planned targets, so logically, that would leave 25%. But then what? Obviously, the Iranians are not willing to simply capitulate just because a few decapitation strikes are carried out. And even if Mojtaba Khamenei were to be killed now, that by no means guarantees that the Iranians would then be willing to capitulate. And effectively, that was largely a demand for capitulation. In addition, there are reports that the Iranians have once again prepared for massive counterattacks, have dug out their drones again, have dug out their missiles again, of which they obviously had significantly more than previous estimates suggested. So at this point, a lot is unclear, except that shooting has started again, and that missiles are once again flying toward the United Arab Emirates. It's uncertain if they'll strike back now, or if this will end in 2 hours. Nothing can be said for sure yet. We will address this topic, as well as the war in Ukraine, next Wednesday at 8 p.m. German time, in a live stream followed by a Q&A session. That means if you have questions, you can ask them then. Once again, thank you to today's video sponsor, CyberGhost VPN. If you subscribe using the link below, you'll get an 83% discount and an additional 4 months free, plus a 45-day money-back guarantee at the start. And that's it for today's situation report on the Persian Gulf and the war with Iran. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up. That helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment if you have anything to add. And if you're new here, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you don't miss future videos. That's all for now from Torsten Heinrich. Thank you for your attention and see you soon. At this point, I would also like to give my special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Mahamouri, as well as Lieutenant Jans vom Eck, Uwe de Vrain, nicknamed Tabib, Karsten Schultz, Robert Veal, Vision Soundlab, Lick Chatter, NTX, Malermeister Noggle, Marcus F., Alex Rosenthal, Matt Best, Zick Rider 666, Mota 1000 Janis Gu, Sasha Muller, Cunningham, and Eustress. Thank you very much. Without you, this wouldn't be possible.